So it's a new year, and what a joy and gift it is to be able to celebrate new beginnings and new possibilities. I shared in the newsletter this past week that my resolution for 2018 is to exercise every day. And I am so glad to say that so far I've done it. I know a week is not that much of a challenge, but every little bit counts, right? And I've remained true to this exercise goal by walking outside, by taking in the beauty of nature. And then on those cold days that we had where it was way too cold to walk outside, I took to doing yoga inside the warmth of my own home. And if you've never done yoga before, it is a wonderful practice, not only for the de-stressing benefits it has, but also the mindfulness that it yields and the appreciation it brings of our own physical bodies and the breath that enlivens them. So if you've never done it before, I encourage you to take on that new practice. Some of you may have made a resolution for 2018. Maybe you have decided to start with a fresh mindset. Or maybe you want to try something new this year. Or maybe you want to change a habit. But each new year is an opportunity to begin again, which is why the lectionary text for today is so fitting. It starts at the beginning of the Bible, and it grounds us in the most important and life-giving relationship that we could ever know or experience. And that is the one between the Creator and creation. So let's hear these words anew this day from Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was without shape or form. It was dark over the deep sea, and God's wind swept over the waters. God said, "Let there be light." And so light appeared. God saw how good the light was. God separated the light from darkness. God named the light day and the darkness night. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. And so the poem continues with God calling the rest of creation into being. Sky and dry land, plants and trees, sun and moon and stars, animals and human beings. And with each new creation, God claims the goodness and the value that is inherent within. In a way, for me, this poem is gospel. It is good news. It was composed by a priestly writer during the time of the exile, when the people of Israel were living under Babylonian rule outside of their land. Their previously known world was now without shape or form. And this poem adamantly proclaims that God can create even out of chaos. It reminded them of God's faithfulness to creation, of which they were a part, and that God had not abandoned them, even if the chaotic circumstances of their lives and those around them led them to believe otherwise. God created and continues to create. And God longs for a world where love and harmony and unity reign. This morning, we begin a new series focused on the United Methodist social principles. And these are a series of faith statements that engage the real needs of the world. And they guide us in how we can respond to those needs out of a place of love. There are 6 sections to our social principles, and the first one focuses on the natural world. And this is how that particular statement begins. All creation is the Lord's, and we are responsible for the ways in which we use and abuse it. Water, air, soil, minerals, energy resources, plants, animal life, and space are to be valued and conserved because they are God's creation, and not solely because they are useful to human beings. God has granted us stewardship of creation. It goes on to say a lot more, but just in that snippet, it's pretty powerful, isn't it? So, in order for us to be faithful stewards of creation, perhaps we must first learn to value creation itself, much like the priestly poet of Genesis 1. He saw creation for what it is: beautiful, plentiful, and ultimately belonging to God. How often do we stop and consider creation in this way? I imagine that a regular practice of appreciation and reverence for the things that God has created might keep us from mindlessly overusing or abusing the natural world. Perhaps this prayer from the Celtic tradition might become part of our regular practice of reverence. I watch this morning for the light that the darkness has not overcome. I watch for the fire that was in the beginning and that burns still in the brilliance of the rising sun. I watch for the glow of life that gleams in the growing earth and glistens in sea and sky. I watch for your light, O God, in the eyes of every living creature and in the ever-living flame of my own soul. If the grace of seeing were mine this day, I would glimpse you in all that lives. Grant me the grace of seeing this day. Grant me the grace of seeing. The poet of Genesis 1 also illustrates the interconnectedness and the harmonious relationships within creation. He understands that he is dependent on and part of a much larger whole. And he sees the rest of creation within that unified order. How often do we recognize that we are interdependent beings? Not only upon one another or upon God, but also upon the life-giving processes that are a part of nature itself. As we become more distanced from the sources of our food and our water and energy, there's a tendency to think of them solely in terms of their usefulness to us as humans, and we can neglect their intrinsic value as part of creation. When my children were little and we lived in Georgia, my husband and I decided to plant a garden right next to the house. Most of our church members at that time had gardens, and so we wanted to try it out for ourselves. And if you've ever been to Georgia, you've seen that rich red clay soil that is excellent for growing vegetables. And this was the first time that we had ever planted a garden, so we were a little overzealous with the amount of seeds and plants that we put in the ground. And we soon found out that we had way more cucumbers than we knew what to do with. We didn't know that one plant could yield 10 cucumbers, and we planted 10 of them. And there's only so many ways you can eat cucumbers, fresh or pickling. That's about it. But it was a wonderful experience because the kids tended the garden. They were able to witness the growth and the progress of each plant. And they could eventually see that this food came from the earth and not the grocery store. We were all able to experience in a real way how amazing and valuable and plentiful the earth is, and our dependence on its help and its future sustainment. The priestly poet of Genesis 1 also has an expansive view beyond his own moment in time on this earth. He recognizes that God has entrusted creation to all generations, not just the ones before him and not just his own, but the ones that will come after him. If we are to be faithful to the covenant relationship with our Creator as caretakers of creation, then we must learn how to live in ways that will protect and preserve the earth's natural resources so that future generations can enjoy the beauty and embrace the privilege of taking care of God's world. My prayer today is that we will include this commitment in our goals for this new year. In a moment, we are going to remember our baptisms, and we will celebrate the communion meal. Both of these are signs of God's promises and new possibilities. I hope that they will remind each of us of God's faithful, creative love for us and for the world, and that we, in turn, will respond out of that love by living in ways that will value and protect God's beautiful and sacred creation.